Hi there, I'm Darlene, and I want to share something that still makes my heart ache. My mom refused to watch over my sick son, the one moment I needed her most. But what crushed me even more was what she tried to do next, moving into my home like nothing had happened. How does love turn into obligation? How does family blur into betrayal? Before we dive in, tell me, have you ever felt invisible in your own family? The call came just after 9 in the morning, slicing through the stillness of an early autumn day in Springfield. The leaves outside Jesse's school fluttered like anxious hands against the windows, and I clutched my phone tighter when I heard the strained voice on the other end. Jesse was wheezing, the kind that turned shallow and fast, the kind I knew too well. I dropped everything, my bag, my carefully organized to-do list, the small hope I'd been nursing for weeks about today's interview. In 20 minutes, I was at the school's front office, cradling Jesse in my arms. His little face was flushed, his breathing uneven against my chest. He leaned into me without a word, trusting me the way only a child can trust their world. In the car, I adjusted his seatbelt and watched him fall into a restless sleep almost immediately. His small chest rose and fell with each labored breath. My mind raced. I needed to get him home, needed to get his inhaler, needed to figure out what to do next. The interview was at noon. 2 hours. That was all I needed. I stared at my phone, scrolling through contacts I already knew were impossible today. Everyone worked. Everyone had kids of their own. Everyone had something. Everyone except her. It took 3 rings for my mother to answer. Her voice was cheerful, filled with the false brightness she wore like perfume. "Mom," I said, my voice already trembling at the edges. "Jesse's sick. I need to take him home, but I have an important interview at noon. Could you come over, just for 2 hours?" There was a pause, a long one, heavy with calculation. I could almost hear her considering the inconvenience. Then she sighed, the dramatic kind she reserved for when she wanted me to feel how burdensome I was. "Oh, honey," she said, "I wish I could, but your father and I are meeting friends for lunch. Then we're going to the Williams anniversary party. It's been on the calendar for months." I pressed the phone harder against my ear, as if proximity could change what she was saying. "Please," I whispered. "Just 2 hours." Another sigh. "I can't cancel now. Besides," she added, her tone turning brisk, "you'll figure it out. You always do." Then she laughed lightly, as if we were sharing a private joke. "Maybe it's time you thought about letting us move in with you. We could help out when emergencies like this happen." My stomach twisted. I ended the call before I said something I couldn't take back. Sitting there in the driver's seat, my hands trembling around the steering wheel, I remembered the first time I realized I wasn't her priority. I must have been 6 or 7. I had a fever so high I couldn't stand. She left me with a neighbor because she didn't want to miss her tennis lesson. I remembered lying on a stranger's couch, staring at a popcorn ceiling, trying to convince myself that love sometimes looked different than what you thought. I drove Jesse home in silence. Every mile felt heavier than the last. When we arrived, I carried him upstairs and tucked him onto the couch, wrapping him in his favorite blanket. His breathing eased a little. Mine didn't. I sat on the edge of the couch, watching him sleep, the soft hiss of the humidifier filling the room. My phone buzzed again. A new message. "Mom." I didn't open it. Not yet. I knew it would be cheerful, blameless, full of casual disregard. I knew it would hurt more than it should. I knew deep down that this was not new, that this was just the latest crack in something that had been splintering for years. I placed the phone face down on the table, leaned back into the couch, and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere inside me, something quiet and fierce began to shift. The invitation arrived in a cream-colored envelope, thick and embossed, like it was announcing a gala instead of a 7-year-old's birthday party. It said, "Celebrating our dearest grandson Jesse," in swirling gold letters. No mention of me, no mention of Jesse's mother, no mention of family beyond the sanitized image my mother curated for herself. The autumn air had turned crisp, biting my skin as I read the card on the front porch. Jesse, sitting beside me, didn't notice. He was too busy being 7, too busy dreaming of cake and games and balloons. I tucked the invitation into my jacket pocket and smiled at him, pretending nothing felt off. The party was held at the community center downtown, decked out in blues and silvers, a space transformed into a carnival of perfection. Everywhere I looked, there were decorations bearing Jesse's name. Slogans like "Grandma's Little Star" emblazoned across banners. Wanda fluttered around the room like the queen of a parade, receiving hugs and congratulations as if she had raised Jesse herself. I stood at the edges, clutching my paper cup of lemonade, ignored but visible enough to be pitied. A few family friends offered me tight, polite smiles before turning back to fawn over Wanda. I tried to focus on Jesse, on the way his face lit up when he saw the magician, the way he threw back his head when he laughed at the clown's jokes. But the knot in my chest grew tighter with every passing minute. Toward the middle of the party, I noticed a photographer moving through the crowd, herding everyone into carefully posed groups. I drifted closer, hoping to be part of the family portraits, hoping maybe, despite everything, there was a place for me here. But each time, gently, seamlessly, I was nudged aside, first politely, then firmly. At the time, I thought maybe it was an accident. Maybe I was blocking the light. Maybe there wasn't enough space. Later that night, scrolling through social media with Jesse asleep beside me, I saw the truth. Album after album flooded my feed. Family forever. 3 generations of love. Grateful for our blessings. Picture after picture of Jesse, of Wanda and Alan, of cousins and uncles and aunts. I wasn't in a single one. Not one. It wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate omission. An erasure. I set my phone down and stared at the ceiling, the fan casting lazy shadows across the room. I remembered birthdays long ago when I was the one holding the camera, the one capturing moments for others, the one never in the frame. You learn early in families like mine that belonging isn't automatic. It's conditional. And sometimes it's revoked altogether without anyone ever needing to say the words. As I packed up Jesse's gifts and gathered our things to leave, Wanda intercepted me near the door. She wore that syrupy smile, the one she saved for company and crowds. Her hand touched my arm lightly, like we were old friends. "We should talk soon," she said, voice light as spun sugar, "about some future arrangements." There was a note in her tone that chilled me more than the October air outside. I nodded, unable to find words, and walked Jesse out into the night. Behind us, the party roared on. The sky had shifted to a permanent shade of gray by mid-October, and the wind carried the promise of a colder season ahead. I was folding Jesse's laundry when I heard the knock at the door. Light, cheerful, practiced. It was Wanda, standing there with a Tupperware container in hand, like a peace offering. There was a familiar brightness in her smile, the kind that always meant she wanted something. I invited her in, too tired to argue, and set the container on the counter without opening it. She made herself comfortable at my kitchen table, smoothing the wrinkles from her scarf as if rehearsing her lines. After a few minutes of polite conversation, she leaned in, voice soft and confidential. "We've been thinking about doing some renovations," she said, tapping her manicured nails against the table. "Small things, really. But it's tough at our age to handle everything alone." I nodded, sensing where this was going but giving her the space to say it. "We thought maybe," she continued sweetly, "you could co-sign a small loan with us. Nothing too burdensome, just a formality, you know. Family helping family." The words were syrupy, thick, meant to drown any resistance before it could rise. I smiled tightly, heart thudding painfully in my chest. She began listing all the things they had sacrificed for me: school fees, Christmas presents, sleepless nights, a calculated ledger of love turned into debt. I excused myself to check on Jesse, who was busy building a fortress of pillows in the living room. He grinned up at me, safe in his little world. I returned to the kitchen with a polite apology and a decision already firm in my gut. "I'm sorry, Mom. I can't." There was a flicker in her eyes, not surprise but annoyance, quickly masked by a sympathetic sigh. "I understand," she said, patting my hand like I was the unreasonable one. "We just thought you cared enough to help." I walked her to the door, watching her retreat down the steps with a stiffness in her spine. I thought that would be the end of it. Later that night, as I was packing Jesse's lunch for the next day, my phone buzzed. A text from Mom. Photos of hospital test results, pages of reports, doctor's notes circled dramatically. The message below read, "Your father and I aren't doing well. I guess we're just not important enough anymore." The guilt was immediate, heavy. I sat on the floor of the kitchen, back against the cabinet, reading and rereading the message until the words blurred. I questioned myself. Again. Was I abandoning them? Was I selfish? But somewhere deeper, a quieter voice reminded me of the pattern. The sudden illnesses, the urgent needs, the ever-mounting debts. I thought back to when I was 13, missing a school trip because Mom said we couldn't afford it, only to find out later she'd used the money for a spa weekend with her friends. I closed my eyes, breathing through the old, familiar ache. I had barely finished wiping the counters when my phone vibrated again. Another voicemail, another plea, another storm of guilt I didn't have the energy to weather. Without listening, I deleted it. As I set the phone down, another notification flashed across the screen, an alert from a public records site I used for work. My name had been flagged for a newly filed lien. Trembling, I clicked through. It was real. A lien for a home improvement loan, opened under my name, co-signed by no one else. I stared at the screen, the edges of my vision narrowing, the weight of the betrayal pressing against my ribs. It wasn't just a trap anymore. It was a war. The package sat on our doorstep like a glossy promise wrapped in red foil and golden ribbons. The cold October wind nipped at my jacket as I picked it up, heavier than I expected. Jesse tore it open with the ferocity of a boy who still believed in magic. Inside, nestled in foam and glittering in brand new plastic, was a gaming console, the kind of thing that had been on Jesse's wish list for over a year. There was no card, just a sticky note taped to the box. "For my favorite boy. Love, Grandma." Jesse whooped with delight, clutching the console to his chest. He didn't notice the way my stomach dropped, the way my hands trembled slightly as I smoothed the wrapping paper on the table. It wasn't his birthday. It wasn't Christmas. It wasn't anything. My mother never gave without expecting something back. I knew that as surely as I knew the sky would darken before winter. The phone call came that evening, right after Jesse had fallen asleep cradling the console like a new puppy. "Oh, honey," Wanda chirped, too bright, too rehearsed. I was thinking, wouldn't it be wonderful if Jesse spent Thanksgiving weekend with us? Just a little break for you, some quality bonding time for us. I pressed the phone tighter against my ear, my gut twisting. The gift wasn't a gift. It was a down payment. I mumbled something non-committal and hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. Later, over breakfast, Jesse bounced on his chair, babbling about all the games he'd play, all the snacks Grandma promised, all the fun they'd have. He asked, eyes shining, if he could stay the whole weekend with her. I smiled, a cracked thing, and excused myself to refill the coffee pot before he could see my face fall apart. It felt like being trapped in a game where every move led to a loss. If I said yes, I handed him over. If I said no, I became the villain, the mother who kept joy away. Memories drifted back, unbidden. I remembered being Jesse's age, caught in the silent tug-of-war between my parents. I remembered being sent to my father's house with tearful goodbyes and coming home to icy silences. I remembered realizing, too young, that love could be a battlefield, and sometimes you were the prize, not the fighter. And now it was happening again, not to me, to my son. I leaned against the counter, clutching the edge with white-knuckled fists. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence. I didn't know the right answer. I only knew I wouldn't let history repeat itself. That night, I stood outside Jesse's bedroom door, listening to him chatter excitedly to his stuffed animals about his big trip to Grandma's. The weight in my chest was almost unbearable. I slid down the wall, sitting on the hardwood floor, and pulled my knees to my chest. The decision loomed over me, massive and unavoidable. No matter which path I chose, someone would bleed. The first hint came in the form of glances. Not the curious kind, but the careful, loaded kind. A brief flicker of pity or something sharper before quickly looking away. At the grocery store, Mrs. Langston from 3 houses down hesitated when she passed me by the canned soup aisle, her cart veering just slightly away from mine. At Jesse's school pickup, a few familiar parents offered tight, strained smiles, the ones that never quite reached their eyes. I brushed it off at first. Long weeks and heavy skies could make anyone sullen. Or maybe, I thought with a bitter chuckle, I was just finally starting to see what had been there all along. The real confirmation came at a distant cousin's baby shower. I hadn't planned to go, but Jesse was excited for the cake and balloons, and I figured a few hours among family wouldn't hurt. I was wrong. While refilling my coffee cup, I overheard a soft murmur behind me. Must be so hard for Wanda, poor thing, raising a grandson while her daughter runs around. I froze. The cup trembled in my hand, sloshing hot liquid onto my knuckles, but I barely felt it. I turned just slightly, catching a glimpse of two cousins deep in conversation, their brows furrowed with concern, their mouths twisting with judgment. It clicked into place, every awkward encounter, every hesitant greeting, seeds planted carefully by the one person who should have been my shelter. I left without saying goodbye. That night, after Jesse was asleep, I opened my laptop and checked my email. Among the usual bills and spam, one message caught my eye. Subject line: Family Concerns. My breath caught. I clicked it open. There it was. A carefully crafted narrative of my supposed selfishness, my neglect, my abandonment of my aging parents. Attached were photos, snapshots from recent months, deliberately cropped to erase my presence, painting a picture of Jesse happily thriving under Wanda's care, while I was conspicuously absent. I stared at the screen, cold creeping up my spine. Someone, no, Wanda, had made sure even the story of my life was rewritten without me. I thought of all the years I had fought to be seen, to be enough, to be part of something that was never really mine. I remembered childhood Thanksgivings where I would sit quietly at the table, watching everyone laugh at jokes I wasn't part of, promises of loyalty whispered behind closed doors, loyalty that cracked the moment it became inconvenient. I had spent so long convincing myself that if I just tried harder, loved better, sacrificed more, I would finally belong. I closed the laptop slowly, the finality of the motion ringing louder than any slammed door. The family I had fought so hard to keep had already chosen to discard me. A buzz at the door startled me. Through the peephole, I saw a courier standing stiffly against the cold night air, holding a large manila envelope. I opened the door with numb hands, signed without reading, and locked it again the moment he left. The envelope sat heavy on my kitchen counter. I didn't need to open it to know. I could feel it, like a gathering storm. The cafe was nearly empty when I slipped inside, the bell above the door giving a half-hearted jingle against the heavy November air. The smell of burnt coffee and wet wool filled the space. I found Travis in the corner, nursing a black coffee, staring out the window like he was trying to see through the gray sky. He looked older than I remembered. Or maybe I was just seeing him clearly for the first time. I slid into the seat across from him, my hands wrapped tightly around a chipped mug of tea I hadn't touched. For a moment, neither of us spoke. There was too much and not enough to say. Finally, Travis sighed and leaned forward, his voice low. "She did it to me too," he said. The words hung there, fragile and raw. He told me how years ago, Wanda had guilted him into co-signing a loan, small at first, for necessary home repairs, she said, then another for unexpected expenses. Until the debts piled high and the weight became his alone to bear. She had promised it would only be temporary. She had promised it was the least he could do for all they had sacrificed. Promises made of smoke and swallowed whole. He told me how he had fought to keep his home, how he had stayed up late into the night, juggling bills, praying for a way out. And when he finally asked for help, the doors that had once swung open for demands slammed shut. He looked at me, his face carved with exhaustion. "She's not going to stop, Darlene," he said. "Not until you have nothing left to give." The words sliced deeper than I expected. Deeper because I knew he was right. Deeper because part of me had always known. I sipped my tea, now cold and bitter, and stared out at the slush gathering in the parking lot. Memories floated up, uninvited. Me, sitting at the kitchen table at 9 years old, counting the coins from my allowance to pay for a school trip because Mom said there wasn't enough money. Me, staying home from a friend's birthday party because mom needed me to clean the house before her book club arrived. Me, believing that if I just kept saying yes, if I just kept giving, eventually it would be enough. It never was. I blinked hard, shoving the tears back where they belonged. I wasn't that little girl anymore. I thanked Travis, my voice steadier than I felt, and stood to leave. Outside, the cold hit me like a slap. I pulled my coat tighter around me and headed for my car, keys clutched in my hand. The phone buzzed in my pocket just as I slid into the driver's seat. Wanda. I let it ring, then played the voicemail through the car speakers, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Her voice was syrupy sweet, but underneath, I heard the steel. "We need to talk," she said, "about Jesse's future, about what's best for him, maybe a more stable living arrangement." The cold in my veins had nothing to do with the weather. I stared out into the bleak afternoon, the sky pressing down heavy and low. The battle wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The night was colder than usual, the air sharp enough to bite. Jesse had finally drifted off to sleep, the living room dim and soft under the glow of the string lights we had lazily pinned around the window frames. For the first time in weeks, I let myself believe we were finding our way back to something like peace. Rachel's text came just after 10. "Saw your parents snooping around the building. Said they were checking on Jesse. Thought you should know." I sat frozen on the couch, my heart lurching in my chest. The knock at the door came 15 minutes later. Light at first, then harder. I stayed perfectly still, not breathing, listening to the sound of keys jangling. I moved silently to the peephole. Wanda and Alan stood on the porch, Wanda trying key after key from a small, shiny ring in her hand. Alan kept glancing over his shoulder, his posture stiff with guilt. I didn't wait. I flung the door open so hard it banged against the wall. "What are you doing?" I hissed. Wanda jumped, clutching her chest theatrically. "We were just worried," she said, wide-eyed, voice dripping with false concern. "We thought maybe something happened to Jesse." Alan muttered something about forgetting the spare key. I stood between them and the door, my whole body trembling, not from fear but from fury. "There is no spare key," I said, each word razor-sharp. "Not anymore." Without another word, I slammed the door in their faces and locked it, bolting every latch we had. It took me an hour to stop shaking. After they left, I stepped outside with a flashlight, scanning the small porch. It didn't take long to find it. A key taped under the flower pot by the stairs, just as if they had been planning it for weeks. My stomach turned. All the nights I had lain awake, worrying about whether I was overreacting, whether I was making it worse than it was. And here it was. Proof. They had intended to breach our home, our last safe place. Inside, Jesse shifted in his sleep, murmuring something about rockets and astronauts. I sank to the floor by the front door, back pressed against the wood, and let the silence wash over me. Not the comforting kind, the kind that howls in the spaces where safety used to be. I remembered being 14, finding my journal pages scattered across the dining room table, Mom smiling sweetly as she said she was just cleaning. The feeling of violation, of being laid bare without consent. It wasn't cleaning then, it wasn't checking now, it was control, always control. I stood up, changed the locks that night with tools I barely remembered buying but kept for reasons I now understood. When I was finished, I checked on Jesse again, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. He stirred, but didn't wake. "This ends now," I whispered into the quiet. The next morning, taped to the front door, flapping slightly in the wind, was a certified letter. Legal threats from Wanda. The war had officially begun. The early December sky hung heavy, bruised with clouds that threatened snow. Inside our small apartment, the warmth felt thinner somehow, stretched too tight. After changing the locks and reinforcing the windows, a fragile peace had settled over Jesse and me. I clung to it, fragile and bright as glass, hoping maybe, just maybe, we had turned a corner. That hope shattered when the letter arrived. It was thick and official, the kind of envelope you knew carried bad news even before you opened it. Inside I found a detailed invoice, page after page, listing every dollar spent on me since birth. Formula, diapers, school field trips, doctor appointments, groceries. The numbers totaled to a sum so grotesque I had to sit down. At the bottom, in Wanda's looping, unsteady handwriting, was a single line. "We trust you will do the right thing." I crumpled the letter in my fist before smoothing it out again. Evidence. I would need evidence now. The first blow had landed. The second came harder. An email from Human Resources at the hospital requesting an urgent meeting. I already knew what it was before I read the attached report. Anonymous tips about my financial instability, my mental unfitness, my lack of professional reliability. They didn't name Wanda. They didn't have to. I imagined her sitting at her kitchen table, carefully stringing together half-truths and outright lies, stitching a tapestry designed to unravel me. I spent the night combing through old texts and emails, saving screenshots, documenting every shred of proof I had. I didn't sleep. 2 days later, I was served. Court papers, heavy and cold in my hand. Wanda and Alan were suing for partial ownership of my apartment, citing familial dependence and equitable interest. The room tilted. I had bought that apartment with my savings, fought tooth and nail for every chipped tile and leaky faucet. It was mine, but they wanted it. They wanted everything. The final blow came in the form of accusations, falsified emails, forged text messages, fabricated voicemails, all claiming I had emotionally abused my aging parents, that I was unstable, dangerous, unfit to care for Jesse. It wasn't just my home they were trying to steal now. It was my son. Sitting on the couch that night, the Christmas tree blinking softly in the corner, I watched Jesse build a snow fort out of pillows, his laughter ringing through the room. He had no idea. I pressed the legal notice flat against the coffee table, my hands steady now, my heart no longer breaking, just burning. I thought back to when I was 8 years old, caught between my parents shouting, sworn to secrecy, told that love meant loyalty, and loyalty meant silence. Not anymore. I wiped my eyes, cleared my throat, and picked up my phone. When my lawyer answered, I didn't hesitate. "It's time to end this," I said. Winter settled heavy over the town, but for once my heart felt a little lighter. The weeks after the court decision blurred together in a strange, suspended quiet, the kind of silence that felt both terrifying and freeing. There were no more knocks at my door, no more anonymous emails slipping into my inbox like poison darts, no more whispers behind my back when I picked Jesse up from school. Just silence, and in that silence I learned to breathe again. Wanda and Alan didn't disappear exactly. They lingered at the edges of town, weighed down by legal debts and the slow, steady withdrawal of sympathy. Family members who once praised their sacrifice now spoke in tight, uncomfortable tones, realizing too late how deep the rot had run. I didn't rejoice in their fall. There was no satisfaction in it, only a quiet mourning for the parents I had wished they could be and never were. I started therapy, sitting across from a woman who listened without judgment as I unwound years of tightly knotted guilt and shame. Some days I cried until my ribs ached. Some days I sat silent, staring at the peeling paint on her office walls. But little by little, the pieces began to stitch themselves together in new patterns. Messy, imperfect, but real. Jesse joined the local science club, his eyes lighting up as he built model rockets and designed planets from papier-mâché. We started eating dinner together at the small kitchen table, no phones, no distractions, just us, relearning what peace sounded like. One evening, while we were stringing popcorn garlands for the Christmas tree, Jesse looked up at me, his fingers sticky with butter and salt. "Mom," he said, "will we ever see Grandma again?" The question landed like a pebble dropped into a still pond. I paused, threading another piece of popcorn carefully, thinking. "Maybe one day," I said softly, "when things are different." He nodded, satisfied, and went back to his garland, humming under his breath. Later, when he was asleep, I drove out to the lake on the edge of town, the same place my parents used to take us when we were little. The water was partially frozen, the surface catching the pale light of the moon in broken shards. I stood at the edge for a long time, holding a small stone in my hand. It was cold and rough against my palm, like a memory I hadn't been ready to let go of. I thought about all the secrets, all the half-truths, all the ways love had been twisted into a chain. And then, with a flick of my wrist, I let the stone fly. It skipped once, twice, before disappearing into the black water. The ripples spread wide, reaching farther than I could see. I smiled, a small, real thing, and pulled my coat tighter around me. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Looking back, I realize healing isn't about waiting for someone to apologize. It's about deciding you deserve peace, even if no one else thinks you do. Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones where you have to choose yourself, over loyalty, over guilt, over a history that demands your silence. In the end, family isn't just about blood. It's about trust. It's about safety. It's about love that doesn't come with a price tag. What about you? Have you ever had to walk away from someone you thought would always be there? I'd love to hear your thoughts. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment with the number 1, or let me know where you're watching from. If it didn't resonate with you, tell me why. Your voice matters here. And if you'd like to hear more stories about strength, healing, and real life, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Your support means everything. See you in the next story.